Hello, all. I am here to talk to you about a few things regarding the important political regime transition that we see uh, in the chapter for this week. Last week, we looked at the the third week we spent on the party democratic regime, which, remember, was characterized by strong parties. By the end of it, Republican and Democrat, those parties are in large part choosing nominees. The age of party um, identification is pretty strong. On the other hand, there was also the progressive movement. The progressives were generally critics of the party democratic regime. On the one hand, they didn't really think it was democratic enough, that the party bosses controlled too much. And so that's one of the things that they criticized. On the other hand, they also believed in the power of experts. And in that way, they didn't have as much trust in the public, perhaps, as they might have thought, or they thought that the public, when properly enlightened, would go along with the experts. And so they were more interested in regulating the economy. They were more interested in trying to have government be able to do more positively to try to um, solve some of the problems of industrial society. And the progressives were able to make some impact here, especially during the presidencies of Teddy Roosevelt and Woodrow Wilson. Um, More government agencies that would regulate the economy, as in the case of the um, trust busting that Teddy Roosevelt was interested in, the Federal Trade Commission that Woodrow Wilson helped to set up, the through Congress. He signed it. He also was the president during the setup of the Federal Reserve, which tries to regulate or stabilize the currency and economic policy of the United States of America. So those are some examples of progressive reforms. Now, when we say progressive, it doesn't have to mean you actually have to agree with them or think they are real progress, but that's what they call themselves, was progressives. Um, Now, World War One, we looked at last time, and that was in some ways accelerated the progressive ideas here. Prohibition came at the end of the war, the which progressives generally were, or some progressives anyway, favored, along with rural, more conservative voters. Uh, we also saw that the World War One increased the power of the federal government. Okay, but in the 1920s, you don't really see an awful lot of movement on the progressive front. Um, it's famous for being the Roaring Twenties, for being a period of rapid economic growth, of great confidence in prosperity, that the stock market was going to keep going up, that was very attractive to some people who thought that they would be able to get rich from that. Um, and that all ends with the Great Depression, 1929, and following. Um, Such a deep economic depression, high unemployment, people losing their homes, um, all starting off with a stock market crash, but getting much bigger than that. So it was such a deep depression that there were questions about how the United States would come out of it. Um, and Herbert Hoover just tried to take government action to help, not as much as his critics would have wanted. But the key figure here for a really important political change in U.S. history is Franklin D. Roosevelt. Okay, Franklin D. Roosevelt is elected in 1932, about 3 years after the Great Depression started. He defeats Herbert Hoover. He's promised that he's going to do a lot of things to try to, um, you solve the Great Depression. And the course that he settles on is very much indebted to the progressive ideas. Okay, he's not real clear about that when he runs. He talks about balancing the budget and everything, but he takes a lot of ideas that were around from the progressive era and puts them into practice. He has huge majorities in Congress, or at least a good enough majority to do that. Eventually, huge majorities in Congress for the Democrats, and so we want to see some of the reason this is a big change. What we have here really is, again, a new regime. Okay, remember, regimes are institutions, culture, and political behavior that supports a certain way of doing politics. But of course, there's also tensions and everything in the middle of all that. How is this a new regime? Well, it is two different ways you might describe it. One is what Morton Keller calls the populist bureaucratic regime, or bureaucratic populist regime. And I want to focus on the bureaucratic part of that, and we'll talk more about the populist later. The bureaucratic part is to say that the action of government is going to put much more in professional bureaucratic employees now. Okay. The idea of the experts, the importance of experts, the influence of experts, governance by experts that the progressives talked about was put in place through government bureaucracies. Okay. What kind of bureaucracies? Well, one would be, say, the Agricultural Adjustment Administration, which was to set prices, to try to get the farm prices off the bottom and help to raise them. So, eventually we end up with things like paying farmers not to grow crops, paying farmers to get rid of some of their products because there was this huge oversupply, it was thought. And the best way to deal with oversupply is to reduce the supply. Okay. And the Agricultural Adjustment Administration is setting agricultural policies to try to get farm prices back up. There's the National Labor Relations Board, a little bit later in the New Deal, that's supposed to promote labor peace between employers and workers. Okay. Management and labor. And what that's going to do is to try to make government a fair broker between the two of them. Okay. At the same time, it also says very clearly, workers have the right to organize in unions. Okay. So you have, I think it'd be fair to say, a more worker friendly and certainly more union friendly government than before. Now, is that to the point where it's actually starting to be unfair to business or too labor or too union friendly? Well, that's, up to each of you to decide, according to with your own political values. But it does take the side of workers a bit more. After about 1935, there were many, many different bureaucracies. And it's eventually called the alphabet soup, okay, because they all have different acronyms, like the AAA, Agricultural Adjustment Administration, the CCC, Civilian Conservation Corps, the NLRB, National Relations Board, is a later one, the PWA, the WPA. There's just so many different agencies. And this reflects a confidence that government can do more to fix the economy and to also make things more fair when balancing between big business and the average person. Okay. So that's a big part of this idea of the bureaucratic populist regime. More bureaucracy, doing more to regulate the economy and also to redistribute money. Okay, another part of the theory of the New Deal government is not only that government can do more to regulate the economy, to make it work, to get back to recovery, economic recovery, but also to redistribute wealth by, say, paying people to work in national parks in the Civilian Conservation Corps. Okay, eventually paying artists and others in the Works Progress Administration, getting people to do public works through the Public Works Administration. Okay. And the theory is if you give people jobs and you pay them to do them with tax money, they'll spend that money, put money back into the economy, and help to recover the economy. All right, that's another part of the theory. So we have both intervening in the economy to try to regulate it, make it better, make it grow again instead of being in depression, and then also to redistribute wealth to get more money in the hands of people who need it, to support people. Social Security is another example of this. Okay, to program to get people in need money, especially help the elderly retire and support them a little extra income anyway in retirement, in old age. All right, and so this is all part of the theory here of the New Deal. Another way to describe this would be that it's creating a welfare state. Okay, what's a welfare state? Well, a welfare state has various programs, interventions in the economy to promote a certain kind of basic standard of living. Okay, a certain basic standard of living. And the welfare state theory says it's government's responsibility. So what are some welfare state programs in this time? Well, again, Social Security is the premier welfare state program. It's about as well entrenched in American politics as anything could be. If you want to end your political career, talk about reforming or getting rid of Social Security. Okay, that's at least at this point, probably a career ender. Okay, instead, both parties talk about saving Social Security. So it is a government, a welfare state is a government that is committed to a certain basic standard of living for people. Minimum wage would be another example of this kind of program like that. Later in the 1960s, we have Medicaid and Medicare. Okay, the Obamacare program is another example of the extension of the welfare state. And so that's a big shift in American life, to have the federal government committed to the welfare of its population at least some kind of basic level. All right. Now, this is not going to be universally welcome. Not everybody wants this. The Republicans and some conservative Democrats are going to criticize it as government doing too much, government just getting beyond its bounds. Okay. But FDR, Franklin Roosevelt, is very popular. He wins presidential election 4 times. And this period here, 1932 to the mid-1960s, is really a period of the dominance of the Democratic Party in elections through assembling a new coalition of voters. And we'll talk more about that in class on Thursday. But I hope this gives you a little bit of a sense of the kind of shift that we're seeing here, that the Great Depression and then the victory of Franklin Roosevelt in the 1932 election brings about the kind of new bureaucratic-populist regime or welfare state regime that still affects us today.